my life. Here, John says Jesus is our light and our life. Write Psalms 27, verse 1 beside that verse. Jesus is God. And so John says, in Him was light, and the light was light of men. And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness, notice he says, cannot overtake it. There is no power on this earth sufficient to cover up the light that is Jesus Christ. We talked about that this morning in our Bible class. For the last 2,000 years, different philosophies have arisen and fallen that have tried to take the place of Christianity. But every one of them has failed. Why? Because you cannot block the light that is Jesus Christ. And so in Him was the light, light was the light of men, light shines in darkness, darkness did not overtake it. There came a man sent from God whose name was John. This is John the Baptizer. He came to witness, to bear witness about the light so that all might believe through Him. He was not the light. He came as a witness to testify about the light so that all might believe through Him. He was not the light, but He came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which enlightens every man that is coming into the world. And that light, of course, was made flesh and dwelt among us, verses 14 and following. And of course, John's talking about Jesus Christ. And so Jesus is the light of God in the flesh. Now I want you to flip over to John chapter 8 and verse 12. There's two occasions where Jesus Himself said, I am the light of the world. And that statement right there would be the height of arrogance for somebody else to say. I could not say, I am the light of the world. You need to do everything I say you can do, and you will be happy. I can't say that. And no human being can say that. But the light in the flesh can. John chapter 8 and verse 12. Now, the historical context of this statement, why does Jesus make this statement? I want you to flip back to chapter 7 for just a moment. And we will notice at the beginning of chapter 7 in verse 2 that the occasion where Jesus says, I am the light of the world is the Jewish celebration of the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. Now let me tell you something about the Feast of Booths. The Feast of Booths was a celebration that was commanded by God. It fell at the end of the summer harvest around our time of October. It was the end of the year, the end of the harvest, and was close to the beginning of the new year. The Feast of Tabernacles was an occasion where the Jews celebrated God taking care of them through the 40 years of them wandering in the wilderness. And during the celebration, for a week, they made tents out of palm branches that they laced together. And they stayed in these tents, these tabernacles, that's the old Hebrew word. They stayed in these tabernacles, these tents, for a week to remind themselves that God took care of them during that 40-year period. And when they had that special celebration, then they would also burn lights, burn candles during that celebration. Now, if you look here at chapter 7, Jesus is with His family, and Jesus' brothers do not believe that Jesus is the Savior. They do not believe right now that He is the Messiah. In fact, they kind of mock Him in verse 4. And Jesus' brothers say, why don't you go up to Jerusalem where all the Jews are because of the Feast of Tabernacles, and why don't you reveal yourself to the people? And you can just hear the sarcasm in their voice. And Jesus says, no, my time is not yet here. But your time is always opportune. Notice verse 7. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it because its deeds are evil. Now it's in that context where Jesus says in John chapter 8 verse 12, I am the light of the world. So the Jews are there celebrating the time where God was a pillar of fire during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and Jesus said, I am the pillar of fire. I am your light. Now, the immediate context of that statement in John 8, look over at chapter 8. The immediate context of that statement is where this woman was caught in the very act of adultery itself. The Pharisees caught this man and woman doing this ungodly thing, and the law of Moses said that the man and the woman were to be stoned to death. The Pharisees did not bring the man with them, which suggested to us that they weren't really wanting to do what the law said. They were wanting to trap Jesus. That was what was motivating them. And so they bring this woman to Jesus, and they're expecting him to take one side, let her go, or take the other side, stone her. Either way, they thought that Jesus was going to be in trouble. But you can't block the light of the world. The first thing the light does is he exposes the Pharisees' hypocrisy. Look at verse 7. Jesus says, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw the first stone." You see, the light shines on us, and it exposes our hypocrisy. And so these Pharisees were convicted in their heart, and they left the presence of Jesus from the oldest to the youngest, leaving just the woman standing there. No doubt embarrassed and fearful. What is this man going to say to do? Jesus was at least respected as a great teacher, even among those that did not necessarily accept him as being the Savior. But then the light shone on her as well. In verse 11, verse 10, Jesus says, "Where are those who accuse you?" And in verse 11, the woman says, "There's nobody here, Lord." And Jesus says, "I do not condemn you either." Now notice the light shines on her and exposes her sin. Jesus recognized that she was living in sin. But the light with somebody who is sincere and repents has a different effect on those who are hypocrites. And so Jesus tells the woman, "I do not condemn you either. Go and sin no more." So the light spoke, and the light says, "You are in sin, now stop sinning. I'm having grace on you. Go and sin no more." And so Jesus is the light of the world, and he exposes those who are hypocrites, and he exposes those who are sincere. And for those who are sincere, repent, the light gives another chance. The second occasion where Jesus says that he's the light of the world is in chapter 9, verse 5, where he gives the blind man his sight back. And he says there in that passage, "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Now we look over John 12 and verse 46 rather. And in John chapter 12, verse 46, Jesus says that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. And so when we are baptized into Jesus Christ, then we are baptized into the light. And so that brings me to my third point, and that is Christians are sons of light or children of light. And that is a Hebrew figure of speech. That means that you are someone who has the quality or the characteristics of being light. And there are a host of passages in the New Testament that show us that Christians are light. Now, we are not light in life in the sense that Jesus was, certainly not. But we are light because Jesus dwells in us. And so Christians are the light of the world. And in fact, in Acts chapter 13, Paul and Barnabas are traveling around preaching the gospel. And in Acts 13, verse 47, these men specifically quote that passage from Isaiah 49 and verse 6 where it says, "Jesus is the light of the world." And they apply that to themselves as they are preaching and teaching the gospel. And so when Christians shine the light of Christ on others, then we are also light. The passage that is most familiar to us in this regard, of course, is Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. Where Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount says, you're the salt of the earth, the salt has lost its flavor. How will it be salted again? It's not good for anything but to be cast out and trampled on the men. But then he says, you are the light of the world. You Christians, you disciples of Christ, you are the light of the world. And a city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Men do not take a candle and hide it under a bushel, but they set it on a lampstand so that it gives light to all who are in the house. And so, brethren, you and I are, now that Jesus has gone back into heaven, you and I are lights with skin on. We are Christ's representatives in this dark, sinful world, shining the light of Christ on others through what we teach and through how we live. Now that's the reason why the world doesn't like us. In John chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, Jesus says, the world does not like the light because it exposes their sin. And the world will not come to the light lest its works be shown to be evil. Now I want to study one more passage here, and that's Luke chapter 11, verses 33 through 36. In Luke chapter 11, Luke records the same basic sermon that Jesus gave in Matthew chapter 5 on the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about we are the light of the world. But look at how Luke records Jesus' statements here. Luke 11, beginning in verse 33. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it away in a cellar nor under a basket, but on the lampstand so that those who enter may see the light. Now here he says something that's a little bit confusing, so I want us to think through this. Verse 34, Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. When your eye is clear, your whole body also is full of light. But when it is bad, your body also is full of darkness. Then watch out that the light in you is not darkness. If therefore your whole body is full of light, with no dark part in it, it will be wholly illumined, as when the lamp illumines you with its rays. What in the world is she talking about? Well, let's think through this just a moment. We've got some covers here around these lights. If those covers were to get so filthy with dust, it would block the light, and we would not be able to see it. And so periodically we clean those so that the light can shine out better. Jesus here says that our eye is the light to the body. What does he mean? He's talking about our spiritual perspective. Our spiritual perspective is what allows light into our spiritual body. Now, if our perspective is dark and covered up because of sin, because of fear, because of doubt, because of a sinful lifestyle, whatever it is, if our eye is covered up, then God's light cannot shine into our bodies, and our body is full of darkness. And Jesus says if your whole body is full of darkness, if your spiritual body is full of darkness, you're in a whole heap of trouble. If the light bulbs go out, it doesn't matter about the cover, does it? Because the light's not going to give any light. And so Jesus is telling us you need to have a spiritual perspective on life in order for the light to illumine your body and that you can serve as a light to others. One last verse, if you happen to be taking notes, Ephesians 5 and verse 9, where the Apostle Paul says that the fruit of life